Our next homework and quiz is going to be over what I call alphabet assessment. As we move into 1120, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of patient assessment. And these initialisms and acronym are what we use to kind of build the framework for how to start assessing patients. AVPU, for example, is to determine my patient's level of consciousness, whether or not they are lethargic, sleeping, fully alert, these types of things. OPQRST is primarily designed to assess a patient's pain, though it can be used to assess their difficulty breathing or just a general condition. And sample is really kind of figuring out where they are in recent history and what led up to the situation. I have to be honest, when I started my career, I kind of thought, okay, this is all nonsense. I know how to communicate with people. I'm just going to talk to them and figure out only the information that I need. And maybe a year or two into my career, I just kept making mistakes. I kept forgetting good questions. I kept not really navigating cleanly through an assessment. And so I sat down, I said, I really need to just figure out how to do this right. I'm going to come up with my own way to assess patients. And when I did that, I started to reinvent the wheel. I realized that I started creating all of the things that they tried to teach me in class about patient assessment, AVPU, OPQRST, and sample. It turns out they're just really good, really succinct ways of, like I said, building a framework for assessing patients. Now, they're not always applicable in every way, but they're an excellent place to start when you're learning this. And to this day, I use most of it. I should say, all of it almost every time in some way or another. So I'm just going to quickly go through these. AVPU, like I said, this is for determining our patient's level of consciousness. This happens early on in our assessment. This is us walking in, seeing the patient, and noting whether or not the patient is alert, meaning looking at us. Do they track us as we come in? And if they don't, why not? If I walk in and a patient is perhaps laying on the ground with their eyes closed, they are not alert. If I have to communicate or touch them in some way, then we're moving down the scale, right? Now, if I come in and there's a man laying on his couch, eyes closed, and I say, hey, buddy, can you hear me? And he opens his eyes and he looks at me. Okay, well, then he may not have been completely alert. He's definitely alert to verbal now. If I say, hey, are you okay? And he says, oh, yeah, I was just sleeping. Well, okay, we've now determined that it wasn't verbal stimulation, that he was just sleeping. He's actually alert. But if I'd called out to him and nothing happened, maybe I go up and kind of either do a sternum rub or tap his eyelid, doing a corneal reflex test we'll talk about later, or maybe just kind of shake him or whatever the case is. If that's what rouses him from his current state, then we would call him alert only to pressure, sometimes pain as well. Now, really, though, this is kind of just moving through a person's neurological capability. What is my patient capable of? This isn't really determining whether or not they heard me or not. This is literally their neurological state. And so finally, in the basement here, we have wholly unresponsive. This is, of course, I've walked in, somebody doesn't have their eyes open, or perhaps, I guess in the case of a seizure, their eyes might be open. But I guess the point is are they reacting normally? Are they reacting appropriately in whatever state they are in? If I can get them to communicate with me through my communication, we call that verbal. But if I've got to actually physically interact with them in some way, we'll call that pressure. And you'll often see this in the case of not even really communicating. Like, it's going to be uncommon to have a patient with their eyes closed, not really moving, don't respond to your verbal communications, and then you poke them and they say something. That's incredibly unlikely, and probably more due to a patient's unwillingness than incapability. What this is usually is a patient who was not alert, and you've either done a sternum rub or elicited a pain response, and now they kind of cringe or groan in response, and is usually pretty low on the totem as far as their neurological capability. In fact, later we will look at what's called a Glasgow Coma Scale. And you will see that AVPU is essentially the first four parts of that here. Are they spontaneously alert? Are they alert to sound or verbal or pressure, and so on and so forth? But we'll get into that another time. Now, OPQRST, it's an interesting situation to talk about the patient assessment. If we're looking at our patient assessment, of course, you just come to the scene with this stuff. You start making sure that the scene is safe and that you have everybody that you need. And then you're going to really start interacting with the patient here. And AVPU occurs in the level of consciousness, determining if the patient is alert, is normal, and so on and so forth. You might be inclined when you start learning patient assessment to say, okay, well, I don't see OPQRST and sample anywhere here in the primary assessment. Oh, it's down here in the secondary. So that means it's a long time after initially meeting the patient. But this distinction only exists in learning land. Realistically, you're going to be talking to a patient and ascertain whether or not they're breathing, whether or not they have a pulse almost immediately. And if, for example, during their chief complaint, you said, how are you feeling today? And he said, well, I think I'm having a heart attack because my chest hurts. You are very likely immediately leading into a whole host of questions like, when did this happen? What makes it better or worse, and so forth. So it's interesting because even though this is listed, I guess I would say linearly, if that's correct, a lot of this information can be overlaid as far as timing, but it can only really, in my opinion, be taught as a checklist in a certain sense. But anyways, getting back to it, OPQRST is once you have determined what the patient's chief complaint is or their condition, now we're really investigating questions that help us define what's happening there. And the easiest way to start is through the concept of pain. If a person says, my arm hurts, then we'll go through OPQRST to figure out information there. O for onset is just a simple question. Did this happen all of a sudden, or did it happen gradually or over time? P for palliation or provocation. This is just what makes it better or worse. Oh, your arm hurts. Does anything make it better or worse? Yeah, every time I move it, it hurts more. It turns out when I put the ice on it, it makes it feel better, or maybe just nothing. Nothing changes it. Quality is different than severity. S for severity is really a scale of 1 to 10, or minor, moderate, or severe. And quality is kind of describing exactly what it feels like. We'll get into this more later, but to put it simply, quality is often determined by just asking, hey, would you say that this is a sharp pain, a dull pain, or burning sensation, things like that, to really kind of figure out how it feels. R is for region or radiation, meaning where does the pain hurt? And if it hurts somewhere, does it hurt anywhere else as well? Severity, like I had mentioned, is determining how bad exactly that it hurts. Scales of 1 to 10. I prefer moderate to severe questions. Hey, would you describe your pain as moderate or severe? Simply because if I hear another patient say that the pain is 11 out of 10, it will make me explode, I think. And then time is just when you first noticed it, right? And so to kind of quickly run through this situation, it might be, let's say we've got a patient complaining of chest pain. I would say, okay, when did that chest pain start? Was it all of a sudden, or was it gradually? They say, well, I guess it just kind of happened all of a sudden. And I say, okay, anything make it better or worse? No, I don't think so. No, so when you take a deep breath or move around, that doesn't make it worse? No, I guess not. Okay. You say pain. Is it more like a sharp pain or a dull pain? I guess I'm not really sure. That's okay. And then you said in your chest, is it hurting anywhere else? And when you say chest, is it just up here? Is it down low? Right in the center? Severity, would you call this chest pain moderate or severe? I guess I'd call it severe, he says. Like, okay, and then when exactly did you first notice the pain? He's like, I don't know, sometime before I called you. Okay, more like 5 minutes or more like an hour? I guess like an hour. Okay, and never before, right? Like not yesterday, not a week ago, just, no, I guess not. And so, anyways, I don't mean to get too long in the tooth here, but you can really kind of break this stuff down. And again, it's best viewed as a framework for asking good questions. If you simply came in and said, I know how to ask all the right questions, I'm not familiar with OPQ-RST, I'd be skeptical. But the ultimate point is we need to learn how to kind of navigate getting important information. And before you know exactly what to ask or how to differentiate perhaps a pulmonary embolism pain from a heart attack pain, very different systems, just knowing the questions to ask can really kind of help you navigate through that. Now, sample is really more of a general description, I think, is how I want to phrase it, more of a recent history and past history discussion. You'll see what I mean as we kind of go through it. But once I've determined this patient's got chest pain and I've gotten some questions answered about it, now I'm trying to wonder, like, what are the comorbidity issues here? What are the possibilities that his chest pain is maybe a heart attack? Well, if I had known he had a heart attack in the past, then I could say, hey, you had a heart attack in the past. Did it feel like that? And if he said yes, well, that's awfully condemning or insightful as to what this might be. And a sample is really how we kind of ask broader questions, is maybe how I want to describe it, in furthering trying to figure out how we want to assess our patient. S is probably the most confusing one for students. This can be looked at one of two ways. Simply you stating what their signs and symptoms are, or maybe what I prefer, really inquiring if there are any further signs and symptoms. For example, if you know your guy already said that he has chest pain, this would be a good time to just say, I know you have chest pain. Is anything else hurting? Or do you have any other problems like difficulty breathing? Now, in our assessments, we teach you to ask those two questions early on. And so if you get to the kind of speed bump of, wait, I already asked those, what should I say here? I do think it's appropriate to just simply say, do you have any other signs or symptoms of any kind? Then we want to inquire about the patient's allergies, whether or not they're allergic to any medications, or in the case of food allergies would be important if they have any type of allergic reaction. We want to ask about their medications. We'll get into how to do all of this stuff later because I really want to talk about how to save you a lot of time and whatnot, but mostly I just want to give a brief overview here in case any of this is confusing. So medications is simply reminding you to ask what the patients take. I will say that many times in my career have I just grabbed them all, put them in a bag, and looked at them when I had time. So we'll get into that another time. P for past medical history. This is just discussing their past medical history, as simple as it sounds. I almost can't stop myself from getting into how to kind of navigate these questions. You know, you don't want to say, do you have any medical history? Because the patient may just go on and on and on about a bunch of non-pertinent medical history, surgeries from when they were a child, and so on and so forth. But mostly this is just, we'll teach that later. This is just how to get into whether or not they have any medical history at all. Last in and out, you'll see this in the book as last oral intake. I just find asking questions about the patient's renal and GI tract so important. You know, a patient who has burning on urination or flank pain, or who has dark colored stool or loose stool, these can all be super, super strong indicators and very obvious signs of other issues. And I just noticed that clinicians who don't ask about their urination, the patient's urination and bowel movement, can miss a lot of really important information. And that's why I just kind of include it in this almost tongue-in-cheek, last in, last out thought process here. So we want to know what the patient last ate, super duper important in regards to a patient's difficulty breathing, whether or not it was perhaps a choking issue or an allergic reaction. But also it can pertain to many other things, like when they have electrolyte imbalances or excess issues there. And then, of course, like I said, urination and bowel movement stuff. And then events, E for events. What was the patient doing when they noticed the problem? This is just asked simply once you're getting through this information. Okay, we know some of the timing of the events. We know that it was perhaps sudden, and we know that you noticed it this morning. What were you doing when you noticed it? Is what this question. And really, I think O all the timing ones is what really confuse students outside of signs and symptoms, is because they just get them all jumbled up. And so to make it simply, just a reminder, O is the question of sudden or gradual. Time I view as when did you first notice it? And then E, what were you doing when you noticed it? So anyways, like I said, that's just a brief overview of this. The homework assignment will be filling this out word for word, or I guess I should say, I don't need it word for word. I just want to make sure that you understand what the word alert means. And so if you can do that by phrasing that differently, I'm okay with that. And then the quiz will reflect this. It'll just be a blank sheet, just like this, and we'll grade it accordingly. So take care. Let me know if you have any questions.